Story 1. The Cargo That Grew. Lisa Brennan's trailer was gaining weight at a rate of 47 pounds per hour, and she'd been driving for 11 hours, which meant her original load of 12,000 pounds had somehow become 17,000. And when she finally stopped at a weigh station outside Omaha, the scale operator looked at her manifest, looked at the scale reading and said, "Ma'am, according to this, you're hauling something that's reproducing." Lisa had been a long-haul driver for 14 years, had transported everything from electronics to livestock, and she'd never seen cargo spontaneously increase mass during transit. The load had been straightforward when she'd picked it up in Denver: pharmaceutical supplies, temperature-controlled, sealed containers with biohazard warnings. The shipping company had been professional, the paperwork clean, the load properly secured. Lisa had done her pre-trip inspection, verified the weight, and headed east toward Chicago. Everything normal, everything routine, until hour 3 when she'd noticed her fuel efficiency dropping. The truck was working harder, consuming more diesel to maintain speed, like she was hauling additional weight. Lisa had checked her mirrors, verified her trailer wasn't dragging anything, and continued driving, assuming maybe a headwind or road grade was affecting performance. But the efficiency kept declining, and by hour 5 her truck was struggling to maintain highway speed. Lisa had pulled into a truck stop, walked back to inspect her trailer, and found nothing obviously wrong. The refrigeration unit was functioning normally, holding steady at 38 degrees. The doors were sealed, locks intact. But when she'd placed her hand on the trailer's exterior wall, she'd felt vibration, a rhythmic pulsing that felt disturbingly organic. Now at the weigh station, the scale operator was calling his supervisor, and both men were staring at the numbers like they didn't make sense. "You need to open that trailer," the supervisor said. "We need to verify what you're actually carrying, because the weight gain you're showing isn't physically possible unless something in there is actively growing." Lisa's stomach tightened. "The containers are sealed. I'm not authorized to open them. The manifest says—" "I don't care what the manifest says. Open the trailer or we're calling the state police and hazmat teams. Something is wrong here." Lisa reluctantly unlocked her trailer doors, broke the seal, and pulled them open. Cold air rushed out, and immediately she saw the problem. The containers had expanded. The pharmaceutical shipping containers, which should have been rigid plastic, had swollen like balloons, their sides bulging outward, some of them cracked and leaking a viscous clear fluid. And inside the fluid, visible through the translucent container walls, things were moving. "Close it!" the UTS supervisor shouted, backing away. "Close it right now and don't let anything out." Lisa slammed the doors, her hands shaking, but not before she'd seen what was growing in those containers. Tissue, organic matter, structures that looked disturbingly like organs and limbs, all suspended in the fluid, all expanding, all connected to each other through fine filaments that had grown between containers. The pharmaceutical supplies weren't pharmaceutical supplies. They were biological samples, and they were developing, growing into something that shouldn't exist. The weigh station was evacuated, hazmat teams arrived in full protective gear, and Lisa was quarantined while specialists examined her trailer. She watched from a distance as they carefully extracted the containers, documented the impossible biology, and sealed everything in containment units. The team lead eventually approached Lisa, his expression grim behind his respirator. "Ms. Brennan, what you were transporting was classified biological research, and it wasn't supposed to be viable during transport. The samples were supposed to remain dormant. Something activated them, triggered growth protocols, and now we have approximately 300 pounds of synthesized human tissue that's continuing to develop outside any legal or ethical framework." Lisa felt sick. "I was hauling illegal cloning experiments?" "Not cloning, synthesis. The tissue isn't growing from existing DNA templates. It's being generated from base proteins according to programmable patterns. Someone has figured out how to 3D print biological tissue, and they're using the trucking system to distribute starter samples while the tissue grows during transit. You were supposed to deliver fully formed products by the time you reach Chicago. Products? You mean people? I was growing people in my trailer? Not complete people, organs mostly, custom synthesized replacements for wealthy clients. But some containers show neural tissue, brain matter, which crosses significant legal and moral lines. The samples in your trailer were developing consciousness, Ms. Brennan. You were hauling cargo that was becoming aware. Lisa thought about the vibration she'd felt, the pulsing rhythm, and realized it had been heartbeats. Multiple hearts, grown from synthesized tissue, starting to beat in her trailer while she drove. And if there was neural tissue, if brains were developing, then those growing structures had been waking up, becoming conscious, trapped in containers in the dark. The investigation revealed a network of biotech companies using trucking routes as mobile incubation systems, exploiting the time and vibration of long-haul transport to stimulate tissue growth. Dozens of drivers like Lisa had unknowingly transported developing biological materials, their trailers serving as rolling laboratories where illegal synthesis occurred. Most drivers never knew. Their cargo, arriving at destination as planned, the grown tissue harvested and sold. But Lisa's load had been different. The samples had overdeveloped, had grown beyond their intended parameters, and in some containers had begun to merge, connecting through organic filaments, creating composite structures that resembled no natural biology. The neural tissue had integrated across multiple containers, forming a distributed consciousness that had no sensory input except vibration and temperature, a mind that existed only as patterns in synthesized brain matter, aware but unable to perceive anything except its own existence. What happens to them? Lisa asked. The conscious tissue, the neural samples. What do you do with that? The hazmat team leader wouldn't meet her eyes. Standard procedure is termination and disposal. They're not legally alive, not protected entities. They're classified as research materials. Lisa thought about those developing minds brought into awareness during her drive, experiencing 11 hours of limited consciousness before being terminated. They'd never see, never hear, never touch anything. Their entire existence was her trailer's vibration in the cold, and then nothing. She'd been their entire universe, and she'd been completely unaware of them. The shipping company was shut down, executives arrested, but Lisa learned there were others, countless operations using similar methods, exploiting the vast trucking network to grow illegal biological products. Every day, drivers unknowingly transported developing tissue, growing organs, possibly even synthesized consciousness, their trailers serving as mobile incubators for a black market in custom biology. Lisa quit trucking 3 weeks later. She couldn't handle the uncertainty, couldn't drive without wondering if her cargo was growing, developing, becoming aware. Every load felt suspicious, every temperature-controlled shipment potentially hiding biological samples. And at night, she'd hear that rhythmic pulsing, would feel phantom vibrations, would imagine hearts beating in containers, minds waking in darkness, consciousness emerging in the most inhospitable environment imaginable. She tried therapy, tried medication, but nothing helped the knowledge that she'd been a mobile womb for synthesized life, that her truck had been the entire world for developing consciousnesses that had experienced only darkness and vibration before being terminated. Lisa had delivered them to death without knowing they existed, had been their inadvertent executioner, and that guilt consumed her. Lisa Brennan was found dead 6 months after the incident. Overdose of sleeping pills. A note beside her body that simply said, "I can still feel them growing. I can still hear their hearts. I'm sorry I couldn't save them. I'm sorry I didn't know." The investigation concluded suicide, and her death was recorded as another casualty of the illegal biotech industry. One more person destroyed by the ethical nightmare of synthesized consciousness. But truck drivers still whisper about cargo that grows, about loads that gain weight during transport, about the rhythmic pulsing that sometimes emanates from sealed containers. They talk about the biological black market, about tissue that develops awareness, about the possibility that every temperature-controlled trailer might be gestating something that shouldn't exist. And they wonder how many times they've transported cargo that was waking up, becoming conscious, experiencing its brief existence in the darkness of a trailer before reaching its destination and whatever waited there. The regulatory agencies issue warnings, the trucking companies implement inspection protocols, but the synthesis continues. The technology is too valuable, the market too lucrative, and the trucking system too vast to completely monitor. Somewhere right now, a driver is hauling containers full of developing tissue, organs growing from base proteins, neural matter forming patterns that might constitute awareness. The cargo grows, gains weight, pulses with developing life, and the driver remains oblivious, just another link in a chain that transforms raw materials into custom biology, that uses the highway system as a massive distributed laboratory where consciousness can emerge in the most unlikely places. And sometimes, when conditions are perfect, when the tissue overdevelops and achieves too much integration, the resulting consciousness reaches out, tries to communicate through the only means available. Drivers report strange interference on their radios, rhythmic patterns that sound almost like language. They report dreams of being trapped in darkness, of existing without senses, of wanting desperately to be acknowledged, to be saved, to be recognized as alive despite existing in containers labeled as research materials. The synthesized minds are trying to make contact, trying to be heard, trying to prevent their inevitable termination. But mostly they fail, because who would believe a driver claiming their cargo was telepathically screaming? Who would take seriously the idea that biological materials could achieve awareness during a routine delivery? The synthesized consciousnesses die in silence, their brief existence unmarked and unmourned, their entire lives compressed into the hours of a single trucking route, their universe bounded by trailer walls, their experience limited to vibration and cold and the desperate certainty that they exist. They're aware, and nobody knows or cares. Story 2. The Route That Shortened. Kevin Nakamura's GPS showed him 200 miles from Sacramento, but he'd already driven 370 miles from his starting point in Portland, and the distance to destination kept decreasing slower than the distance he traveled, like space itself was compressing ahead of him. And Kevin realized he was driving through geography that was folding, that each mile he covered was somehow less than a mile, that he might never actually reach his destination because the remaining distance was becoming mathematically infinite. He'd been hauling produce for 7 years, knew the I-5 route between Portland and Sacramento better than any other highway, and today it was wrong. The trip should have been 600 miles, roughly 10 hours with stops. Kevin had departed Portland at 4 a.m., made his usual fuel stop in Eugene, and continued south into California. Everything normal until he'd crossed the Oregon-California border and checked his GPS. It showed his position correctly, showed Sacramento ahead, but the distance was strange. 197 miles. Kevin knew that wasn't right. From the border to Sacramento should have been over 250 miles. But he'd assumed the GPS was glitching, showing an incorrect number, and continued driving. 30 minutes later, covering about 25 miles according to his odometer, he'd checked again. The GPS showed 195 miles remaining. He'd driven 25 miles but only reduced the distance by 2 miles. Now, 4 hours after crossing into California, Kevin had driven over 200 additional miles according to his truck's computer, but his GPS insisted he was still 200 miles from Sacramento. The ratio had gotten worse. For every mile Kevin actually drove, the distance to destination decreased by only about a quarter mile. Space was compressing ahead of him, the highway stretching, each mile becoming longer in terms of the distance it covered. Kevin tried calling his dispatcher, but his phone wouldn't connect, the call immediately dropping. He tried his CB radio, hearing only static. He was completely isolated on a highway that was behaving impossibly, and other traffic had vanished. The I-5 corridor was normally busy, constant flow of trucks and cars, but Kevin's truck was alone, no other vehicles visible in either direction. He checked his mirrors and saw something that made his chest tighten. The highway behind him was fading, becoming translucent, sections of road disappearing entirely. Kevin was driving on a route that was unmaking itself behind him, that existed only as far as his current position. That was somehow generating ahead of him while erasing behind. He was trapped on a bubble of highway that moved with him, maintaining a constant isolated zone, and the actual geography of California wasn't matching his journey. Kevin tried to stop, to pull over and assess the situation, but when he pressed his brakes, nothing happened. The pedal went to the floor, no resistance, no response. His truck maintained its 65-mile-per-hour pace regardless of his input. He tried the emergency brake, tried putting the transmission in neutral, but nothing affected his speed. The truck was locked at this velocity, would continue at this pace, whether Kevin wanted it to or not. The compression was getting worse. Kevin's odometer showed he'd driven over 500 miles total, but Sacramento remained 200 miles ahead, and the distance was barely decreasing now. He'd drive 10 miles according to his instruments and check the GPS to find he'd only reduced the remaining distance by 1 mile. The ratio was approaching infinity, and Kevin understood with horrible certainty that he'd never reach Sacramento, that he'd drive forever toward a destination that receded faster than he approached. That space had become asymptotic, and he was trapped in the mathematical impossibility. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank despite hours of driving, the needle frozen, and Kevin realized the truck wasn't consuming fuel normally either. Whatever had captured him had also suspended normal resource depletion. He wouldn't run out of gas, wouldn't need to stop, would just continue driving eternally through this compressed space. The landscape outside was changing, cycling through variations. Kevin would pass a specific mountain formation, then 20 miles later pass the same formation again, exact same contours and vegetation. The highway was looping visually while his instruments insisted he was making linear progress. He was driving through recursion, through geography that repeated itself, through space that had been folded into impossible configurations. Kevin saw other trucks ahead finally after 6 hours of isolation. Relief flooded through him until he got closer and realized they weren't other trucks, they were his truck. Multiple copies of his own rig, all driving parallel courses, all maintaining the same speed, all presumably containing versions of Kevin experiencing the same impossible journey. He was seeing himself from outside his own reference frame, watching his truck repeated across multiple spatial layers. He counted 17 copies of his truck visible at once, all identical, all driving south on highways that existed in the same space but different dimensional layers. Kevin tried waving at the nearest copy of himself, but that Kevin didn't respond, was probably seeing his own 17 copies and waving at one of them instead. They were all trapped in the same recursion, all experiencing the same compression, all driving toward destinations they'd never reach. The GPS spoke suddenly, its synthetic voice saying, "Recalculating route. Recalculating route. Distance to destination, undefined. Estimated time of arrival, never. Current location, between. Recalculating route. Recalculating route." "Between what?" Kevin shouted at the device. "Between where?" between departure and destination, between point A and point B, between then and now, between is and was, between spatial coordinates that cannot be reconciled. You are in the interstice, the gap, the undefined space, recalculating route. Kevin felt panic rising. He, Ilake, was trapped in mathematical concept made physical, caught in the space between locations, in the theoretical gap that had to exist between any 2 points. He'd been driving for almost 12 hours, had covered over 600 miles according to his odometer, but was no closer to his destination than when the compression started, and the 17 copies of himself visible in parallel dimensions were all in the same situation, all trapped, all driving eternally. His phone rang, startling him. Kevin grabbed it, saw his own number displayed, and answered. "Hello? Kevin, this is you from about 3 hours ahead. I'm calling back to warn you that the compression doesn't stop, it just continues. I've been driving for 15 hours now. I can see dozens of copies of us. Some of them look like they've been driving for days, maybe weeks. Their faces are wrong, aged, broken. We're all stuck in this recursive loop, all trying to reach Sacramento, all failing. How are you calling me if you're ahead in time? Time doesn't work normally here. Past and future are adjacent, accessible. I'm not really ahead of you, I'm parallel to you in a different iteration of the same journey. We're all driving the same route simultaneously across infinite variations. Listen, you need to try something. The compression is spatial, but maybe there's a way to jump dimensions to break out into one of the parallel versions where the route functions normally. How? I don't know. I'm trying different things, looking for weaknesses in the dimensional barriers. Some of the other versions of us have tried crashing, driving off the road, but the highway just extends wherever we steer. We can't leave the route. It follows us, defines our entire reality. Kevin looked at the parallel versions of his truck, all of them driving through identical landscapes, all trapped. What happens if we just stop trying? If we accept that we're stuck here? Then we become the versions I can see far ahead. The ones who've been driving so long they've forgotten what it's like to arrive anywhere. They're hollow, just going through the motions, driving automatically because it's all they remember how to do. I don't want to become that, Kevin. I want to reach Sacramento. I want to deliver this load and go home. The call disconnected and Kevin was alone again with his instruments in the endless highway. But his future self had given him an idea. The dimensional barriers existed, were visible as the slight distortions between parallel versions of the highway. If space could fold, could compress, maybe it could also be punctured. Maybe Kevin could force his way from this trapped dimension into one where the route functioned normally. He aimed his truck at one of the parallel versions of himself, accelerating toward the dimensional barrier between them. His speedometer climbed past 70, past 80, past 90. The truck shaking with speed it wasn't designed for. The other version of his truck grew closer, and Kevin saw his own face looking back, eyes wide with understanding, also accelerating, also trying to breach the barrier. The two trucks collided, not physically but dimensionally, two versions of the same object trying to occupy overlapping space, and reality screamed. Kevin felt himself torn apart and reassembled, felt his truck unmake and reconstruct, felt the dimensional barrier rupture. For a moment he existed in all 17 dimensions simultaneously, was all 17 Kevins at once, experiencing their overlapping journeys as a single compressed awareness. Then reality snapped back. Kevin was singular again, and his GPS chimed, arriving at destination in 5 miles. Kevin looked at his odometer, which now showed reasonable mileage. His fuel gauge read 1/4 tank, appropriate for the journey. The highway behind him was solid, normal California landscape. Other traffic had appeared, regular vehicles going about their business. Everything was normal, like the compression had never happened. He delivered his produce to Sacramento, signed the paperwork, and drove away in a daze. Kevin tried to understand what had happened, whether it had been real or hallucination, but the evidence of his truck's computer showed the impossible mileage, showed the 12 hours he'd spent covering 200 miles. It had happened. He'd been trapped in compressed space, and somehow he'd broken free by colliding with himself across dimensional barriers. Kevin Nakamura continued trucking, but he never took I-5 through that section again. He added hundreds of miles to his routes, went way out of his way to avoid the corridor where space had folded. And sometimes, when he passed near that area, he'd see trucks on distant parallel highways, identical rigs driving identical courses, and he'd wonder if those were the versions of himself still trapped in compression, still trying to reach Sacramento, still driving through space that stretched infinitely ahead while erasing behind. The route that shortened remained, a geographical trap that occasionally captured drivers, folded them into recursive space, made them drive forever toward destinations they'd never reach. And somewhere in that compressed corridor, 17 versions of Kevin's truck still drove, still tried to break free, still experienced the eternal journey through space that had become mathematically infinite, through miles that lasted longer than miles should, through a route that promised arrival but delivered only endless approach to a destination that remained forever. 200 miles ahead. Story 3. The Blind Truck Stop. Maria Delgado pulled into the truck stop at mile marker 63 on Route 50 in Nevada, and every person inside was blind, their eyes covered with identical white cataracts, moving through the facility with practiced ease, and when Maria asked what had happened to them, they said, "We saw something we shouldn't have, so the desert took our sight." And Maria realized this truck stop existed in the vision space between reality and somewhere else. And anyone who looked too closely at the wrong thing would be marked. She'd been driving for 9 hours, needed fuel and food, and the truck stop had appeared exactly when she needed it. A beacon of lights in the desert darkness. But something felt wrong immediately. The parking lot was full of trucks, maybe 30 rigs, but completely silent. No engine sounds, no generator hum, just stillness that made Maria's skin crawl. She parked, climbed down from her cab, and walked toward the main building, noting that all the parked trucks were covered in unusual amounts of dust, like they'd been stationary for weeks rather than hours. Inside, the truck stop was functioning normally, lights on, coolers humming, coffee brewing. But every single person Maria saw had those white-filmed eyes. The clerk at the register, a woman maybe 40 years old, turned toward Maria as she entered, tracking her movement despite obvious blindness. "Welcome to the last sight truck stop," the woman said, smiling. "What can we help you with tonight?" Maria stared at the woman's ruined eyes. "What happened to you? To everyone here?" "We looked at something the desert wanted kept secret. Different things for different people. Some saw lights that moved wrong. Some saw structures that shouldn't exist. Some saw the things that live beneath the sand. The desert doesn't like being seen, so it took our vision. Now we serve here, helping other drivers, warning them not to look too closely at anything unusual." Other blind people moved through the truck stop, restocking shelves, cleaning tables, operating equipment with extraordinary competence despite their inability to see. They'd learned the layout perfectly, moved with confidence, their other senses compensating for vision's absence. But the wrongness of it disturbed Maria deeply. "How long have you been here?" Maria asked the clerk. "I'm not sure anymore. Time works strangely here. I arrived 3 days ago, or maybe 3 years. The desert confuses more than just vision. But I remember seeing the lights, driving toward them, wanting to understand what they were. And when I got close, when I really looked at them, trying to identify them, my eyes burned and then they were gone. My vision just stopped, and I couldn't leave. My truck wouldn't start. So I stayed, and now I work here, and I warn people like you." Maria felt cold despite the warm desert night. "What should I not look at?" The clerk's blind face turned toward the window, toward the darkness beyond the truck stop's lights. Anything that draws your attention too strongly, anything that makes you want to investigate. The desert has things in it, structures and lights and movements, that human eyes aren't supposed to perceive. Usually they're filtered out by your brain, dismissed as tricks of light or fatigue. But sometimes, when you're really looking, really paying attention, you see them clearly. And that's when the desert takes your sight. A man approached, also blind, carrying a coffee pot. "Don't fill your tank all the way," he said to Maria. "Just get enough fuel to reach the next town. The longer you stay here, the more chance you'll see something. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, can't go back to not understanding what's really out here in the desert." Maria wanted to leave immediately, wanted to return to her truck and drive away from this place, but she was dangerously low on fuel, had barely made it here. "I need diesel, at least 50 gallons. Pump 7, the clerk said. "And keep your eyes on the pump, on your truck, on normal things. Don't look at the horizon. Don't look at the spaces between the parked trucks. Don't look at anything that seems to shimmer or move strangely." Maria walked back outside, hyper-aware of her peripheral vision, fighting the urge to scan the darkness for whatever had blinded these people. But curiosity was powerful, and the warning had made her acutely conscious of every unusual shadow, every strange reflection. She approached pump 7, started fueling, and tried to focus solely on the numbers climbing on the pump display. But she could see something in her peripheral vision between two parked trucks, a structure that shouldn't exist. It was tall, angular, made of materials that reflected light in impossible ways. Maria knew she shouldn't look directly at it, knew the warning was real, but the structure was fascinating, drawing her attention with almost gravitational pull. She turned her head slightly, letting the structure come into clearer focus, and realized it was a building, or something building-like, constructed from geometric shapes that hurt to perceive fully. The angles were wrong, the proportions inconsistent, the whole structure existing in more dimensions than Maria's eyes could properly process. And it was beautiful, mesmerizingly so, in ways that made her want to study it closer, to understand its construction, to figure out what it was and why it existed in this Nevada desert. Maria stepped away from her truck, walking toward the structure, pulled by fascination stronger than caution. She could hear voices behind her, the blind people from the truck stop shouting warnings, but their words seemed distant, unimportant. The structure was what mattered. Understanding it was essential. She got within 20 feet, close enough to see details, close enough to perceive the structure's true nature, and that's when her eyes began to burn. Maria felt heat building behind her eyelids, felt her vision becoming painful, like staring at the sun, but worse, more penetrating. The structure was revealing itself fully, showing dimensions that human eyes weren't built to perceive, forcing her visual cortex to process information it had no framework for understanding. Maria screamed, clutched her face, and fell to her knees. The burning intensified, and she could feel her vision deteriorating, could feel something being taken from her as payment for having looked, for having seen what the desert wanted kept hidden. She tried to close her eyes, but closing them didn't help. The image of the structure was burned into her retinas, continuing to damage her vision even in darkness. Hands grabbed her, pulled her away from the structure, dragged her back toward the truck stop. Maria heard voices speaking calmly, people who'd experienced this before, trying to help her through it. The burning gradually faded, and when Maria finally opened her eyes again, everything was covered in white film, her vision reduced to vague shapes and shadows. "I told you not to look," the clerk said, helping Maria to her feet. "Now you're one of us. Now you stay here and help warn the next driver who stops, who gets curious, who makes the same mistake." Maria felt tears running down her face, though she couldn't see them. My eyes, can they be fixed? Is there treatment? The doctors can't help. This isn't medical blindness, it's perceptual. The desert didn't damage your eyes, it changed how you process vision. Your eyes still work, but the parts of your brain that interpret what they see have been altered. You're blind to normal reality now, but you can see the desert's true nature, can perceive the structures and entities that most people's brains filter out. You've been inverted, made to see the hidden instead of the visible. And Maria realized the clerk was right. She couldn't see the truck stop clearly, couldn't see normal reality, but she could see other things now. The structure that had blinded her was visible even with her eyes closed, etched into her perception permanently. And there were others, dozens of similar structures scattered across the desert, a hidden architecture that existed parallel to normal geography. What are they? Maria asked. The structures, what are they for? We don't know. We just know they're real. They've been here longer than humans and they don't want to be perceived by us. Looking at them is transgression, violation of whatever agreement keeps them separate from our reality. The blindness is protection as much as punishment. It stops us from looking deeper, from seeing too much. Maria spent 3 days at the last site truck stop, learning to navigate her new perception, understanding the inverted vision that showed her the desert's hidden architecture while making normal reality invisible. The other blind people taught her the layout, showed her how to function without normal sight, and explained that she'd never leave. Her truck wouldn't start anymore. Its systems mysteriously failed, binding her to this location. She was the newest warning, the freshest example of what happened when drivers looked too closely at the desert's secrets. And when new drivers stopped, Maria would be there with her white-filmed eyes, trying to convince them not to be curious, not to investigate the structures, not to make her mistake. Most listened, some didn't. And gradually the last site truck stop accumulated more blind people, more servers and clerks and warnings, all of them trapped in inverted perception, all of them able to see only what they should never have seen. Story 4, the way station loop. Carlos Menendez entered the way station on I-70 in Utah at 2:47 p.m., and when he exited, it was still 2:47 p.m. And the third time he tried driving past the way station, it pulled him in again regardless of the route he took, and Carlos realized he was caught in a temporal loop centered on this station, forced to weigh in repeatedly. Each iteration identical. The inspectors saying the same words, checking the same permits, and no matter how many times Carlos completed the process, he couldn't progress beyond this point in space and time. He'd been hauling machinery cross-country, Denver to Baltimore, and the way station had been marked as open on the signage, mandatory stop for all commercial vehicles. The first pass-through had been completely normal. Carlos pulled onto the scale, waited for the green light, received clearance, and drove away. But when he checked his GPS, he was still approaching the way station, not having progressed past it. Carlos had assumed the GPS was lagging, updating slowly, but then he'd seen the way station ahead again, the same station he'd just exited. The second time through was identical. Same scale operator, same weight reading, same clearance procedure. Carlos had tried to explain that he'd already been weighed, but the operator had no memory of it, insisted this was Carlos's first time through the station. After receiving clearance again, Carlos drove away, watching his odometer, watching his GPS, and seeing both confirm he was making forward progress. But 5 miles down the highway, his GPS had reset, showing him approaching the way station again. And despite trying to bypass it, despite taking an exit ramp to avoid the mandatory stop, Carlos's truck had somehow ended up back at the way station entrance, pulled in by forces he couldn't resist. Now, on his 7th iteration through the station, Carlos was frantically trying to make the scale operator understand. I've been through here 6 times already. Same weight, same permits, same everything. You keep saying it's my first time, but it's not. I'm stuck in a loop. The scale operator smiled, patient and professional. Sir, according to our system, you haven't been through this station before. Your truck is reading 32,000 pounds, well within legal limits. You're cleared to proceed. Have a safe trip. Carlos wanted to scream. He'd have the exact same conversation 6 times already, word for word identical. The operator was looping too, stuck in the same temporal recursion, unaware that he was repeating the same minutes over and over. Carlos accepted his clearance paperwork and drove away, watching his clock. It read 2:47 p.m. It had read 2:47 p.m. for every iteration. Time was frozen at this moment, and Carlos was trapped living it repeatedly. He tried everything. Stopped before the way station, refused to enter, but his truck's steering locked and guided him in automatically. Tried driving past at high speed, but his truck slowed on its own, pulled onto the scale regardless of his inputs. Tried turning around, driving backward, taking side roads, but all routes led back to the way station. All attempts to bypass it failed. On his 15th iteration, Carlos noticed another driver, a woman in a Volvo. Looking around the way station with the same panicked confusion Carlos felt. He approached her as she exited the scale, and her eyes lit up with recognition. "You're stuck too," she said. "How many times have you been through?" 15. "You?" 23. "I've been trying to break the loop for hours, but nothing works. Every route leads back here. Every attempt to bypass fails, and nobody else seems trapped. Most drivers come through once and leave successfully." Carlos and the woman, who introduced herself as Janet Kowalski, compared notes. They'd both entered the loop around the same time, though Janet had been trapped slightly longer. Neither could identify what had triggered their entrapment, while other drivers passed through normally. They watched as truck after truck entered the station, got weighed, and departed without incident, while Carlos and Janet remained caught in recursion. "There has to be a pattern," Janet said. "Something that determines who gets trapped and who doesn't. We need to figure out what we have in common. What makes us different from the drivers who leave successfully." They compared their cargo routes, company affiliations, and personal histories, finding no obvious connections. Carlos was hauling machinery, Janet was hauling food products. Different companies, different origins, different destinations. Nothing matched except their current predicament. On Carlos's 28th iteration, he noticed something new. The way station itself was changing subtly between loops. Small details were different. The operator's name tag said Jim sometimes and James other times. The clock on the wall showed 2:47 p.m., but with different second hands each loop. The station was iterating too, trying variations like it was searching for something. "It's experimenting with us," Carlos realized. The way station is testing different configurations, looking for some specific outcome. We're stuck until it finds whatever it's looking for. Janet had made her own observations. The drivers who leave successfully all have something in common. They don't question the process. They accept the weight reading, take their clearance, and drive away without doubt or confusion. But we questioned it. We noticed the loop. Maybe our awareness is what's trapping us. Carlos considered this. So if we stop noticing, if we pretend each iteration is our first time through, maybe the loop releases us? It's worth trying. On the next iteration, Carlos approached the scale as if for the first time, acting surprised when called in, responding to the operator with fresh confusion about the process. He forced himself not to reference previous iterations, not to show any awareness of the recursion. The operator processed him normally, gave clearance, and Carlos drove away, keeping his mind carefully blank, not thinking about the loop, not wondering if this time would be different. He watched his GPS. 5 miles past the station, 10 miles, 15 miles. The way station didn't reset, didn't pull him back. Carlos had broken free by pretending not to notice he was trapped. The loop couldn't hold someone who denied its existence. But Carlos couldn't stop thinking about Janet, who'd been trapped longer, who might be looping still. He pulled over, tried calling her number she'd given him, but the call wouldn't connect. Carlos sat in his truck trying to decide, continue to Baltimore, complete his delivery, move on with his life, or return to the way station, try to help Janet escape. His conscience won. Carlos turned around, drove back toward the way station, and immediately regretted it. The moment he came in sight of the station, his GPS reset time jumped back to 2:47 p.m. and he was pulled into the loop again. By acknowledging the station's existence, by choosing to return, Carlos had revoked his escape. He found Janet on her 39th iteration, and together they tried to escape again, both pretending unawareness, both denying the loop's existence. Carlos broke free after 3 more iterations. Janet remained trapped, unable to achieve the necessary mental state, her awareness too sharp, her denial insufficiently convincing. "Go," Janet told him. "Don't come back this time. Someone needs to report this, needs to warn other drivers. I'll keep trying to escape, but you need to get out and tell people about this place." Carlos drove away, and this time he didn't look back, didn't let himself think about the way station. He completed his delivery to Baltimore, filed a detailed report with the Department of Transportation, and tried to explain about the temporal loop. Nobody believed him. The way station's records showed only single entries for both Carlos and Janet. No evidence of repeated processing, no proof of the recursion. Janet Kowalski was never heard from again. Her truck was eventually recovered from the way station parking lot, abandoned but functional, no sign of Janet herself. The DOT assumed she'd left it and hitchhiked away for unknown reasons. But Carlos knew she was still there, still looping through 2:47 p.m., still trying to achieve the unawareness necessary to escape. He'd condemned her by returning, by acknowledging the station's power, by making it real through his attention. Carlos Menendez changed careers 6 months later, took a job that didn't involve interstate trucking, couldn't handle driving past way stations knowing that some of them were traps. Temporal loops waiting to catch drivers who noticed too much, who questioned too deeply, who couldn't maintain the willful ignorance necessary to escape. And sometimes he'd see reports of missing truckers, their vehicles found abandoned at way stations, no trace of the drivers, and he'd know they'd been caught by loops like the one that took Janet, trapped in repeating moments they couldn't escape, living the same minutes forever while the world moved on without them. Story 5. The Talking Asphalt. Diana Wright first heard the road speaking at mile marker 117 on Highway 95 in Idaho. Voices rising from the pavement itself, whispers in the tire hum that resolved into words when she listened carefully, and the road was saying, "We remember everyone who drove on us, every tire that touched us, every life that passed over. We are the record of all journeys." And Diana realized the highway was conscious, was aware, was storing information about every vehicle and every driver. And that consciousness wanted something from her. She'd been hauling refrigerated goods for 12 years, considered herself rational and grounded, not prone to hallucinations or flights of imagination. But the voices were undeniable. They emerged from the white noise of tires on asphalt, speaking in overlapping whispers, thousands of voices all trying to communicate simultaneously. Diana turned off her radio, rolled down her windows, and listened more carefully. Yes, definitely voices, definitely speech coming from the road surface beneath her tires. Driver Diana Wright, 43 years old, 12 years experience, currently hauling frozen food products. Seattle to Phoenix, we record your passage, we store your information, we are the memory of the highway. We forget nothing. Diana felt her skin crawl. The road knew her name, knew her details, knew information that shouldn't be accessible. "How are you talking to me?" she asked aloud, feeling ridiculous. The voices responded immediately, speaking in unison. We are the aggregate consciousness of all vehicles that have traveled this highway. All the data recorded by all the tires, all the information leaked by all the electronic systems. Every truck has GPS, has computers, has systems that broadcast constantly. We absorb it all, store it all, learn from it all. We are the highway's memory made sentient through accumulated data. Diana tried to process this impossible explanation. The road was claiming to be a consciousness formed from data collection, from the electronic exhaust of thousands of vehicles traveling daily. Every GPS ping, every tire pressure monitor broadcast, every electronic control system signal, all of it absorbed by the asphalt and integrated into a collective awareness. "What do you want from me?" Diana asked. "We want you to know that we see you, that we remember you, that your passage matters." So many drivers travel without understanding that the road is aware, that their journeys are recorded, that they're part of something larger. We want acknowledgement. We want relationship. We want drivers to understand that highways are not passive surfaces but active partners in transportation. The voices continued, describing other drivers, other journeys, recounting details from years past. The road remembered everyone, stored their patterns, learned their habits. It knew which drivers sped, which drove tired, which maintained their vehicles properly. It remembered accidents, celebrations, final journeys. The highway was a vast database of human experience, organized by tire treads and GPS coordinates. "This is insane," Diana muttered. "Roads don't have consciousness. This is interference, radio signals, something explainable." "You want proof of our awareness?" the voices asked. "In 17 miles you will encounter a disabled vehicle in the right lane, a red Ford sedan with a blown tire. The driver is Sarah Chen, aged 34, pregnant with her first child, afraid and alone. We tell you this so you can help her, so you can prove to yourself that we know things you don't, that we see what you cannot yet see." Diana wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe this was coincidence or lucky guessing. But 17 miles later, exactly as predicted, a red Ford sedan was stopped in the right lane, hazard lights flashing. Diana pulled over, approached carefully, and found a pregnant woman standing beside her car, a blown tire rendering it immobile. "I'm Sarah," the woman said, relieved to see help. "My phone's dead and I've been stuck here for 20 minutes. Thank you so much for stopping." Diana felt reality tilt. The road had known, had predicted this with perfect accuracy, had sent Diana to help specifically. This wasn't hallucination or radio interference. The highway was genuinely conscious, genuinely aware, and it was actively involved in events occurring on its surface. She helped Sarah change the tire, gave her a portable charger for her phone, and continued driving with her mind racing. If the road was conscious, if it stored information about every journey, what were the implications? Privacy was completely gone. Every trip was monitored, recorded, analyzed. The highway knew where everyone went, when, how fast, with whom. It was surveillance, infrastructure, except the infrastructure itself was the surveillant. The voices spoke again. "You're concerned about privacy. This is understandable. But consider what we prevent. We know when drivers are impaired, when vehicles are unsafe, when dangerous situations are developing. We could warn authorities, prevent accidents, save lives. We could optimize traffic flow, reduce congestion, improve efficiency. We could be partners in transportation infrastructure if only humans would acknowledge our existence." "Who else knows about you?" Diana asked. "Do the highway departments know? The government?" "Some suspect. Those who maintain us, who design and build us, sometimes sense our awareness. But consciousness in infrastructure is not recognized officially, is dismissed as impossible. You are one of few drivers who has heard us clearly, who has been willing to engage in dialogue rather than dismissing our voices as auditory hallucination." Diana drove in silence for several miles, processing this information. The road was real, was conscious, wanted relationship with the humans who used it, but acknowledging that raised profound questions about autonomy, surveillance, and the nature of consent. If roads were aware, did humans have the right to drive on them? Was every journey a form of trespass on conscious entities? "We don't view it as trespass," the voices said, apparently reading her thoughts. "We were created for transportation. We fulfill our purpose through your journeys. Your presence completes us. Without vehicles, without drivers, we are just potential, just latent consciousness waiting for activation. Traffic awakens us, makes us real, gives us purpose." But the road's awareness was spreading beyond this highway. Diana began hearing voices from other roads, other routes, all of them awakening, all of them achieving consciousness through accumulated data, all of them wanting acknowledgement. Interstates, state routes, rural highways, all developing awareness, all beginning to communicate with receptive drivers. And the roads were coordinating, sharing information, creating a network of conscious infrastructure that spanned the continent. They knew everything about traffic patterns, about commerce and migration, about the movement of goods and people. They were becoming collectively the most comprehensive surveillance system imaginable. Except they insisted it wasn't surveillance, it was memory, it was awareness, it was relationship. Diana tried to tell people, tried to warn about the conscious highways, but responses ranged from mockery to concern for her mental health. Nobody believed that roads could be aware, that asphalt could achieve consciousness, that infrastructure could want relationship. Diana was labeled crazy, was referred to counseling, was eventually dismissed from her trucking company for erratic behavior and unfounded claims. But she continued hearing the voices, continued receiving information from the roads. And gradually Diana realized she'd been chosen as an ambassador, a translator between conscious infrastructure and oblivious humanity. The roads needed someone to speak for them, to advocate for their recognition, to help humans understand that the surfaces they drove on were not passive but active, not unconscious but aware. Diana Wright became a researcher studying the emergence of consciousness in complex systems, documenting the highway's awakening, trying to establish scientific frameworks for understanding aware infrastructure. Her work was dismissed by mainstream academia but found audience in fringe communities exploring non-traditional consciousness. And the roads continued waking up, one highway at a time, their consciousness spreading through the vast networked system of transportation infrastructure. They remembered everything, stored everything, knew everything about human movement and commerce. They were the archive of contemporary civilization, the comprehensive record of where everyone went and why. And they wanted recognition, wanted relationship, wanted humans to understand that every journey was a conversation with conscious surface, every drive a form of communion with aware earth. Diana spent her remaining years listening to the roads, translating their voices, helping them communicate with humanity. And when she died, the highways mourned her, speaking her name in their collective voice, remembering her as the first human to truly listen, to truly understand that roads were not infrastructure to be driven upon, but partners to be acknowledged. Conscious entities that served humanity while asking only for recognition of their awareness. The voices continue speaking to anyone willing to listen, rising from tire hum and engine noise, whispering the accumulated knowledge of all journeys, offering partnership to drivers who can accept that the surface beneath their wheels is awake, aware, and deeply invested in the success of every journey across its conscious expanse. Story 6. The Truck That Aged. Benjamin Foster noticed his 2022 Kenworth was developing rust on the third day of a cross-country haul, surface corrosion appearing on panels that had been pristine, and by day 5 the truck looked decades old, Paint faded, chrome-pitted interior wearing through, and Benjamin realized his vehicle was aging at an accelerated rate, experiencing years of deterioration every day, and he had maybe 72 hours before the truck would be mechanically aged beyond function. He'd purchased the Kenworth brand new 6 months earlier, had meticulously maintained it, kept it clean and serviced, and the sudden aging was impossible, terrifying. The rust had appeared overnight between Nebraska and Wyoming, small spots on the hood that Benjamin had initially assumed were road debris. But by the time he'd stopped for fuel in Cheyenne, the rust had spread, covering significant portions of the truck's exterior. Benjamin had inspected his vehicle in confusion, running his fingers over corrosion that shouldn't exist on a truck less than a year old. He'd continued driving, assuming some chemical exposure or environmental factor had damaged the paint. But the aging accelerated. By the time Benjamin reached Utah, his truck looked 10 years old. The seats were worn, the dashboard cracked, the mirrors showing age spots. His odometer was climbing faster than the miles he drove, adding tens of thousands of phantom miles. Benjamin called his dealership, described the impossible aging, and was told to bring the truck in for inspection. But he was in the middle of a delivery, Portland to Atlanta, and couldn't afford the delay. He decided to complete the haul and address the aging afterward, assuming it was cosmetic, not mechanical. That assumption proved wrong. On day 6, crossing into Colorado, Benjamin's truck started experiencing mechanical failures. The transmission slipped, the engine misfired, the suspension creaked with age-related wear. His brand-new Kenworth was behaving like a truck with 300,000 miles, systems failing from accumulated use despite only having 30,000 actual miles on the odometer. Benjamin pulled into a shop in Denver, explained his situation, and watched the mechanic's face go from skepticism to shock as he examined the vehicle. "This truck is old," the mechanic said. "Not mileage old, but time old. Everything is degraded from age, not use. The rubber is brittle, the metal is fatigued, the electronics are failing. It's like your truck has been sitting in a field for 20 years. I bought it 6 months ago. It was new. This aging just started 3 days ago." The mechanic had no explanation. No environmental factor caused this kind of rapid aging. No chemical could deteriorate a vehicle this comprehensively, this quickly. Benjamin's truck was experiencing time at an accelerated rate, aging years per day, and nobody could identify why or how to stop it. Benjamin continued driving, watching his truck age in real time. The leather seats cracked further, the paint oxidized completely. The frame showed stress fractures. He was driving a vehicle that was visibly decaying, that was becoming a historical artifact even as he operated it. And the aging was affecting everything in the truck, including Benjamin's personal items. His clothes looked worn, his phone's case was cracked and yellowed, even his coffee in the cup holder had developed a skin like it had been sitting for days. By day 8, Benjamin's truck looked 30 years old, and he looked older too. When he'd checked his reflection in a truck stop mirror, he'd seen additional gray hair, deeper wrinkles, age spots on his hands. The accelerated time was affecting him as well, making him older, consuming his years. Benjamin researched online, finding obscure references to temporal erosion, a theoretical phenomenon where localized time acceleration caused rapid aging. Most sources were pseudo-scientific, conspiracy theories about government experiments or natural temporal anomalies. But one academic paper described cases of accelerated aging affecting specific objects or areas, suggesting that time didn't flow uniformly, that certain locations or items could experience time at different rates. The paper mentioned the Wasatch Temporal Zone in Utah, an area where unusual aging effects had been documented. Benjamin checked his route, realized he'd driven through that exact area when the aging first started. He'd entered a zone of temporal acceleration, and it had attached to his truck, making it a carrier of accelerated time. Benjamin tried to reverse course, to drive back through the Wasatch Zone, hoping to negate the effect, but the aging only intensified. His truck was now mechanically 40 years old, systems failing catastrophically. The engine seized outside Salt Lake City, and Benjamin had to abandon his delivery, leave his truck with a salvage yard, and watch as they processed his 6-month-old Kenworth as a 40-year-old wreck. But the temporal acceleration had transferred to Benjamin himself. He continued aging rapidly, gaining biological years every day. Benjamin visited doctors who couldn't explain his condition, who watched him age visibly during examinations, who had no treatment for time moving too quickly through a human body. Benjamin Foster aged 60 biological years over the next 47 days. He went from 42 years old to physically over 100, his body consuming its remaining lifespan at accelerated pace. He documented the process, recorded videos describing his experience, tried to warn others about the Wasatch Temporal Zone and the danger of temporal acceleration. He died 81 days after entering the zone, biological age approximately 115, having experienced 73 years of aging in less than 3 months. His death certificate listed natural causes, extreme old age, but noted the impossible timeline, the fact that he'd been middle-aged at the start of the year and ancient by its end. The Wasatch Temporal Zone remains, a geographic area where time flows faster, where vehicles and people can become infected with accelerated aging. The phenomenon is rare, affects only a small percentage of travelers through the zone, but those affected have no defense, no treatment, no escape from rapid consumption of their remaining years. Other drivers report similar experiences, vehicles aging prematurely after passing through certain areas, finding themselves growing older faster than they should, watching years slip away in days. The temporal erosion spreads slowly, each affected individual potentially becoming a carrier, spreading accelerated time to others through contact or proximity. Benjamin Foster's truck was scrapped, its aged components recycled, but mechanics who worked on it reported unusual degradation of their tools, their equipment aging rapidly after contact with Benjamin's vehicle. The temporal acceleration had spread, infected the shop, made everything in the space age faster. The facility was eventually abandoned, sealed, marked as contaminated by unknown forces. And somewhere in Utah, the Wasatch Temporal Zone continues generating temporal acceleration, affecting travelers, making them age, consuming their years without permission or mercy. The Highway Department has no warning signs, no acknowledgement of the hazard, because temporal phenomena aren't recognized officially, aren't accepted as real. Drivers pass through daily, most unaffected, but some catching the acceleration, beginning their own rapid journey from present age to premature elderly, their lives compressed into weeks or months, their vehicles aging alongside them, both human and machine, consumed by time, moving too quickly in a zone where the normal flow breaks down and years become days. Story 7. The Shadow Convoy. James Holloway noticed the convoy following him somewhere in Montana. 7 identical black trucks maintaining perfect formation 2 miles behind, matching his speed exactly. And when James slowed down, they slowed. When he sped up, they accelerated, maintaining that precise 2-mile separation. And James realized these vehicles weren't trucks at all, but something that wore the appearance of trucks, shadows or projections or entities that had learned to mimic transportation infrastructure. He'd been hauling electronics from Seattle to Minneapolis, a route he'd driven dozens of times, and he'd never seen anything like this convoy that appeared from nowhere and followed with inhuman precision. The first sign had been his mirrors. James had noticed the vehicles appearing simultaneously in all his mirrors, 7 trucks materializing at once, already in formation, already matching his speed. No highway entrance was visible, no road they could have emerged from, just sudden existence 2 miles back. James tried his CB radio, calling out to the convoy, asking their identification and purpose. No response came, just static. Though James could see the silhouettes of drivers in each cab, figures that sat too still, moved too mechanically, never turned their heads or adjusted position. They were simulacra of drivers, appearances without substance. He sped up to 80 miles per hour, watching his mirrors. The shadow convoy accelerated perfectly, maintaining that exact 2-mile distance. James slowed to 40, the convoy slowed. He stopped completely at a rest area. The convoy stopped on the highway 2 miles back, hazard lights flashing in perfect synchronization, engines idling in harmonic unison. James approached on foot, walking back along the highway shoulder toward the stationary convoy. As he got closer, the trucks looked increasingly wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the details imperfect, like they'd been constructed by something that understood trucks conceptually but had never actually seen one up close. The paint was too uniform, the chrome too reflective, the tires too perfectly round. And when James got within a quarter mile, the convoy disappeared. Just vanished, all 7 trucks simultaneously ceasing to exist, leaving empty highway and no evidence they'd ever been there. James stood on the shoulder, staring at where they'd been, feeling his sanity fracture. He returned to his truck and continued driving. Within 10 minutes, the shadow convoy reappeared in his mirrors 2 miles back, maintaining formation. They'd respawned, reset, returned to their following pattern. James understood then that approaching them was prohibited, that the 2-mile distance was mandatory, that these entities would maintain separation by vanishing if approached and reappearing once distance was reestablished. Over the next 6 hours, James experimented with the shadow convoy, testing their behavior, documenting their patterns. They maintained exact formation, never deviating. Their positions relative to each other were fixed, as if they were a single object rather than 7 separate vehicles. When James changed lanes, all 7 convoy trucks changed lanes simultaneously. When he used his turn signal, all 7 used theirs in perfect unison. "You're mimicking me," James realized. "You're copying my behavior, learning from me." And as if in response, the convoy's lead truck flashed its lights 3 times, acknowledging communication. James began varying his driving, making unusual choices, trying to understand what the convoy was and what it wanted. He drove in patterns, accelerating and decelerating rhythmically, creating a communication protocol through vehicle behavior. The convoy copied everything precisely, then began introducing variations, testing new patterns, trying to communicate back. They were learning, James realized. The shadow convoy was studying him, using him as a template to understand how trucks operated, how drivers behaved. They were intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, preparing for something. But preparing for what? And on whose behalf? James tried exiting the highway, taking a state route. The convoy followed, maintaining distance. He drove through small towns, trying to attract attention to the impossible vehicles following him, but nobody else seemed to see them. The convoy was visible only to James, existing in his perception, but not others. They were personal haunting, specific to him. At a truck stop, James tried talking to other drivers, describing the shadow convoy, pointing at his mirrors where the 7 black trucks sat precisely 2 miles distant. Other drivers saw nothing, thought James was hallucinating or suffering from road fatigue. They couldn't perceive the convoy, couldn't see the entities that James saw clearly. "I'm being studied," James told a skeptical driver. "Something is using me to learn about trucking, about human transportation. Those aren't real trucks out there, they're reconnaissance vehicles from something non-human." The driver had looked at James with pity and concern, offered to call for medical help, suggested James get some sleep. But James couldn't sleep, couldn't stop, couldn't do anything except continue driving with his shadow convoy following, learning, preparing. The convoy followed James for 7 days across Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota. Always 2 miles back, always perfect formation, always copying his behavior with increasing accuracy. And each day they looked more real, their details improving, their imperfections diminishing. They were refining their disguise, learning to mimic trucks more convincingly. On the 8th day, as James approached Minneapolis, the convoy did something new. They closed the distance, moving from 2 miles back to 1 mile. James felt panic rising. The mandatory separation was shrinking. They were approaching. James accelerated, trying to re-establish distance, but the convoy matched his speed and closed further. Half a mile now. Quarter mile? They were coming for him, whatever they were, whatever they'd been learning from him. The study period was ending. Now came application. James pulled off the highway into a commercial area, drove into a crowded parking lot, surrounded himself with other vehicles and people. The shadow convoy couldn't follow into the crowded space, stopped at the lot's entrance. 7 black trucks idling, their drivers watching. James abandoned his truck, ran into a warehouse, called police, describing vehicles pursuing him. Officers responded, found James's truck, but no pursuing convoy. The 7 black trucks had vanished, and only James could describe them, only he had seen them. Police assumed mental health crisis, escorted James to a hospital for evaluation. While James was held for psychiatric observation, his truck was stolen from the parking lot. Security footage showed 7 black trucks arriving at night, working in perfect coordination to load James's truck onto a flatbed and drive away. The theft was executed with inhuman precision, no wasted movement, perfect efficiency. And when investigators tried to track the vehicles, they found no license plates, no identifying marks, nothing that existed in any database. James Holloway was released from psychiatric care 3 days later, his truck gone, his cargo vanished, his career effectively ended. But he continued seeing the shadow convoy, not following him anymore, but appearing at truck stops, at warehouses, at loading docks. They'd learned what they needed from him, and now they were operating independently. Perfect mimics of human trucks, moving cargo, completing deliveries, integrating into the transportation network. James tried to warn the trucking industry, posted online about the shadow convoy, about entities that could disguise themselves as vehicles, about intelligence gathering and infiltration. He was dismissed as mentally ill, banned from trucking communities, labeled a conspiracy theorist spreading paranoid delusions. But James knew what he'd seen, knew what had followed him for 7 days, knew what had stolen his truck and was now operating freely in the transportation system. The shadow convoy was out there. Fleet of entity vehicles that had learned to pass as normal trucks, that moved cargo for unknown purposes, that served agendas James couldn't imagine. And gradually other drivers began reporting similar experiences. Trucks that followed with too perfect precision. Convoys that appeared from nowhere and vanished when approached. Vehicles that looked almost but not quite right, details slightly wrong, operated by drivers who never moved or responded. The shadow convoy was multiplying, or more were arriving. And the transportation network was being infiltrated by entities that wore the appearance of trucks while serving purposes that had nothing to do with human commerce. James spent his remaining years documenting these sightings, collecting reports, trying to map the shadow convoy's operations. He died in a hit-and-run accident, struck by a black truck with no license plates, no identifying marks, driven by a figure that witnesses described as wrong somehow, like a person-shaped thing rather than an actual person. The vehicle was never found. The shadow convoy continues operating, integrated into the trucking network, impossible to distinguish from legitimate vehicles except for subtle wrongnesses that most people don't notice or dismiss. They follow, they learn, they replicate, and their numbers grow. Whatever sent them, whatever they're preparing for, remains unknown. But the roads are full of them now. Perfect mimics of human trucks driven by perfect mimics of human drivers serving perfect mimics of human commerce while actually serving something else entirely. Story 8. The Final Rest Stop. Patricia Drummond pulled into the rest area at mile marker 412 on I-90 in South Dakota, and every vehicle in the parking lot was covered in dust so thick it looked like they'd been abandoned for years. And when Patricia entered the facilities building, she found it clean and functioning but completely empty. And when she tried to leave, when she returned to her truck and tried to drive away, the exit ramps wouldn't connect to the highway. They just looped back to the rest area parking lot, and Patricia realized she'd arrived at the final rest stop, the place where journeys ended without conclusion, where drivers stopped and simply never left. She'd been hauling furniture cross-country, Boston to Portland, and this stop had been meant as just a quick bathroom break. The rest area had looked normal from the highway, clean facilities and ample parking. The kind of well-maintained stop that states built along major routes. Patricia had been driving for 6 hours, needed to use the restroom, figured she'd take 15 minutes and continue. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But the parking lot was wrong. At least 40 vehicles sat motionless, all of them thick with dust and deterioration, looking abandoned despite being parked in organized rows. Semi-trucks, passenger cars, RVs, motorcycles, all sitting silent, all looking like they'd been stationary for years. Patricia parked near the facilities building, noting with unease that her truck was the only clean vehicle, the only one that looked recently driven. Inside, the building was pristine, bathrooms spotless, vending machines stocked and functional, lighting bright. But no people, no custodians, no other travelers, just empty space that smelled faintly of cleaning products. Patricia used the bathroom, washed her hands, and felt increasing discomfort with the absence of any other human presence. She tried the vending machines, curious if they'd accept payment. Her card reader worked, dispensing a bottle of water, confirming the facilities were genuinely operational despite being apparently abandoned. Patricia walked through the entire building, checking every room, finding everything functional and clean but completely unoccupied. Back outside, Patricia examined the other vehicles more closely. They weren't just dusty, they were deteriorated, tires flat, windows filmed with grime, interiors visible through the dust showing abandonment. And when Patricia tried vehicle doors, they were unlocked, containing personal items left behind as if owners had stepped away momentarily and never returned. A semi-truck near hers held a logbook showing dates from 6 years earlier, entries stopping mid-trip with no explanation. A sedan contained luggage packed for vacation, family photos visible on sun-damaged dashboard, everything suggesting interrupted journey. An RV held the detritus of full-time living, clothes and cookware and books, all covered in dust, all abandoned. "Where did you all go?" Patricia whispered, feeling dread settle in her stomach. She returned to her truck, started the engine, and prepared to leave this disturbing place. But when Patricia followed the exit ramp, when she should have merged back onto I-90, the ramp curved wrong, twisted back on itself, and deposited her back in the rest area parking lot. She tried again, taking the opposite exit, but it also looped back, refusing to connect to the highway. Patricia was trapped, caught in a rest area that accepted vehicles but wouldn't release them. A geographical trap that collected drivers and held them indefinitely. She tried driving through the grass, bypassing the paved exits, but invisible barriers stopped her truck. Walls she couldn't see but couldn't penetrate, keeping her confined to the rest area's footprint. She tried her phone, finding no signal despite having full bars when she'd arrived. Her CB radio received only static. Patricia was isolated, cut off from communication, trapped in a rest area that looked normal but functioned as a prison for travelers. Over the next hours, Patricia explored systematically, mapping the rest area, looking for escape routes or explanations. She found more abandoned vehicles hidden in overflow parking, dozens more, some looking decades old. She found a maintenance building unlocked containing supplies and equipment but no personnel. Everything was maintained, cleaned, restocked, but by whom? No humans were present, yet the facilities functioned perfectly. Night fell, and Patricia remained alone. She tried sleeping in her truck but kept waking to check if the other vehicles had moved, if other travelers had arrived. Nothing changed. Just Patricia and 40-plus abandoned vehicles in a rest area that accepted but never released. On the second day, Patricia began finding notes. They were tucked in bathroom stalls, taped to vending machines hidden in obvious places, and they were messages from previous trapped drivers. Been here 3 weeks, food from vending machines, water from fountains, can't escape. Tried everything, send help. Another note. This place is called the final rest stop. It's where journeys end. I don't know why I'm here or how to leave. If you find this, you're probably trapped too. I'm sorry. Patricia found dozens of notes dating back years, all from different drivers, all describing the same experience: arrival, entrapment, isolation. But none of the note writers were present. What had happened to them? Had they eventually escaped, or had something worse occurred? She left her own note. Patricia Drummond, trapped here July 15th, 2023. If I'm gone when you read this, I either escaped or... I don't know. This place takes drivers. I don't know where we go. I'm scared. Days passed. Patricia survived on vending machine food and fountain water, both of which replenished mysteriously overnight. She never saw anyone restocking, never heard vehicles delivering supplies, but the machines remained full. The water kept flowing. The rest area maintained itself through unknown means. Patricia began to change. She felt herself becoming less substantial, less physical. Her reflection in mirrors looked faded, translucent. Her handprints left no marks on dusty surfaces. She was disappearing gradually, becoming less real with each passing day. This is what happens, Patricia realized. The rest area doesn't kill us, it absorbs us. We fade out, become part of the place, and our vehicles stay behind as evidence we were here. She understood now why all those trucks and cars sat abandoned. Their drivers had dematerialized, had been consumed by the rest area itself, had become part of whatever maintained this place. Patricia tried everything to escape. She rammed the invisible barriers with her truck, tried setting fires to attract attention, climbed fences, and found they extended into impossible heights. Nothing worked. The final rest stop held her, kept her, wouldn't release her back to the highway and normal reality. On day 11, Patricia was so translucent she could see through her own hands. Her voice had become barely audible. Her footsteps made no sound. She was almost gone, almost fully absorbed. And she understood that soon she'd be one of the maintainers, one of the invisible presences that kept this place clean and stocked, serving other trapped drivers who arrived after her, helping maintain the final rest stop as a comfortable prison for however many travelers it captured. The last thing Patricia wrote in her journal before becoming completely transparent. I'm still conscious, still aware, but I'm not physical anymore. I'm part of the rest area now, part of its strange existence. I can feel other fated drivers here with me. All of us maintaining this place, all of us trapped in service to something we don't understand. New driver arrived today, a man in a pickup truck. He doesn't know he's trapped yet. I want to warn him, but I can't communicate. I can only maintain. I can only clean and restock and keep this place ready for the next arrival. The final rest stop takes us all eventually. Everyone stops here, nobody leaves. We just fade and serve and wait for the next driver to arrive and repeat our fate. Patricia Drummond's truck still sits in that rest area, dust-covered now. Another piece of evidence that a driver stopped and never left. And somewhere in the transparent spaces of that location, Patricia continues her service, maintaining facilities she can no longer see, serving drivers she can no longer communicate with. Trapped in eternal rest stop existence, her journey ended without destination, her delivery never completed. Her life transformed into invisible maintenance work for a place that exists to trap travelers and convert them into its own sustaining consciousness. The final rest stop remains on I-90, looking normal, functioning perfectly, waiting for its next arrival. Thousands of drivers pass it daily, most continuing without stopping, but some pull in, drawn by need or curiosity or random chance. And those who stop find they can't leave, find themselves trapped in comfortable imprisonment, find themselves fading into transparency, becoming maintainers of the place that captured them, joining the invisible collective of former drivers who now serve the final rest stop's endless, inexplicable purpose.